Welcome to the Original Gangsters podcast. I'm your host, Scott Burnstein. We're going to go back up to the Great White North in Canada. Um, some big news came out. Shout out to Le Journal de Montreal, who was able to break this based on court documents that they got their hands on. And we now have some more insight into the 2009 gangland slaying of Nicky Rizzuto, the Mafia prince, the son of Vito Rizzuto. They called him Ritzy Nick, or Nicky on the Ritz. Nicky Rizzuto, his murder this week, 15 years ago, December 28th, 2009, is what really sparked the endless mafia war that's been going on now well over a decade, and people changing affiliations and alliances. It seems to be like every couple minutes, and several proxy wars, some of which have come to an end. The war between the Quebec Hells Angels and the Blood Family Mafia is done. We're reporting exclusively this week that the 2-year war between the Rizzutos and the Hells Angels has been ceased, and that there is a peace agreement. But all of this drama can really be traced back to 15 years ago this week with the murder of Nicky Rizzuto. Now we have some more details based on Le Journal de Montreal, and I'm going to break it down. So there have been no charges ever filed in Nicky Rizzuto's murder. The belief of authorities is that the killer was a street gang boss who was pretty notorious, named Ducarme Joseph, who went by the nickname Killer Kenny. And Kenny Joseph was a kind of like a free agent, doing work for who would ever pay him the most money. And as we've talked about at length in here at the OG, as well as our companion web magazine, The Gangster Report, with Vito Rizzuto serving his prison time in the United States throughout the second half of the 2000s and first couple years of the 2010s. Enemies smelled blood in the water and immediately started attacking. And they took out Vito Rizzuto's family, his blood family, and they took aim at his crime family. And the first real domino to fall in this was the murder of Nicky Rizzuto. And from confidential informants, one of them being Andrew Scopa, who was a street boss on behalf of the Rizzutos, and then eventually went against the Rizzutos. He was giving up information to the SQ and RCMP the whole time that he was a street boss with his brother. They both have been murdered. And according to a lot of the interviews with him, he provided quite a bit of perspective and insight on Nicky Rizzuto's murder, pointing the finger at Kenny Joseph and talking about the exact machinations of what happened that day, December 28th, 2009. And I might be bearing a lead a little bit here, so I'm going to throw this out there and then I'm going to go back to it. Vito Rizzuto, when he came home in 2012, and he lived for 14 months until he died of cancer in December of 2013, he put out word that he not only had a contract on Kenny Joseph's head, that he wanted Kenny Joseph brought to him alive so he himself could murder him and make him, quote unquote, suffer. This is the first time we're ever hearing about this. It's not surprising. We knew that Kenny Joseph had a murder contract on his head. He was eventually murdered. Unfortunately for Vito Rizzuto, he never got his chance at personal vengeance. His people didn't get to Kenny Joseph until a year after Vito died. Kenny Joseph was killed in 2014. But the fact that he wanted to be the one to personally murder him and torture him it's pretty stark. And again, it makes sense. And we also learned from informants, including Scopa and Freddie Silva, the hitman that flipped a couple years ago, that's been debriefing, and it was very close to the Rizzutos, that Vito Rizzuto was very stoic in a lot of his public persona, did not show a lot of emotion. And according to these new court filings, the only time that the feds, or the SQ, the feds in the United States, but the authorities in Canada had ever heard or seen Vito Rizzuto lose it was in a recorded phone call. And I guess the feds did hear this because it was a recorded phone call in the federal prison system here in America, where Vito was locked up in a supermax, which is for the worst of the worst. For people that are watching this from Canada, the supermax in Florence, Colorado is where every high echelon dangerous person that the United States has custody of, it's where they put them. And it's underground. You only see daylight like 1 hour a day if you're lucky. And the phone call to tell Vito that his son had been assassinated came in the hours, the days before New Year's 2009, becoming 2010. The message was delivered, or the news was delivered, by Leonardo Rizzuto, his other son that has now allegedly taken over and is now the undisputed Don of the Rizzuto crime family. That Leo Rizzuto called Vito on the phone, or I should say Vito called him from prison. Leo told him the news, and Vito broke down in tears. And who would blame him? But it's the only time that authorities have ever heard, or had ever heard, Vito Rizzuto lose his composure. They said that the same phone call went to him when his dad got killed a year later, and he didn't cry on the phone. Same phone call went out to him, or same news went out to him when his brother-in-law Paulo Renda was kidnapped and disappeared and is assumed dead. But when Nicky Rizzuto was murdered, it hit Vito like a ton of bricks. So let's go back to that day, and then a couple things that we learned leading up to that day, December 28th, 2009. It appears that he was set up, obviously. That's how these things happen. But that he was set up by a close associate, Tony Maggi, Tony the Builder, who also met his fate in the subsequent years, was murdered for his role allegedly in Nicky Rizzuto's assassination. And Tony Maggi was a big construction magnate connected to the Rizzuto mob. Whether or not he was a made guy or not, I think is up for debate, but was somebody that was close to the throne. When Vito was locked up in America, Maggi went to him from behind bars, sent word that he wanted the Rizzutos to find him investors for some new projects in the NDG area of Montreal. And Vito met his request, and according to these new law enforcement files and court filings, Vito put Nicky Rizzuto with Tony Maggi. And that's where Vito Rizzuto spent his last year or two, going every day from his house in the suburb of Laval on the north, in the north side, coming into NDG in Montreal, and sharing an office with Tony Maggi. And Maggi gave up Nicky to Kenny Joseph. Kenny Joseph started putting pressure on Maggi, trying to extort him. And for whatever reason, he was more afraid of Kenny Joseph than he was of the Rizzutos. And Kenny Joseph felt emboldened that Vito was out of out of the picture at that point, out of the country. According to Andrew Scopa, Kenny Joseph wanted just to kill everybody and take everybody's territory, and including the royals, meaning the Rizzutos. So it looks like in the minutes before Nicky Rizzuto was gunned down, or not, let's say the hour or two before, he had had a tryst with his mistress, and then had a meeting with Maggie, and then Maggie watched the assassination from his office, and that he sent word to Kenny Joseph where Nicky Rizzuto was going to be. As I said, even though Vito came home and demanded vengeance, and he took it. We talked about an episode a couple weeks ago, how within a couple weeks of him coming home, his former acting boss, underboss, street boss, Smiling Joe DeMalo, was killed, and then it just continued from there. But they were never able to, at least in the time that Vito Rizzuto was alive for those 14 months, was never able to find and get Kenny Joseph the way he wanted to. Kenny Joseph was killed in 2014. Vito Rizzuto succumbed to a battle with a very aggressive form of cancer in December of 2013. Tony Maggie eventually was killed about 5 years ago, I think in 2019. So he lived, for 10 years after all that happened. Kenny Joseph lived for 5. Kenny Joseph's bodyguard was killed in an attack months after Nicky Rizzuto was assassinated. There was a shooting at DeCarme's headquarters at a clothier that he owned, where his bodyguard, Big Pete, was a Greek guy, was killed. But he was able to stay alive for 5 years. Maggie was able to stay alive for 10. But they still went to the grave early, and went to the grave in brutal, bloody fashion. So just wanted to check in and let everybody know about this new information that's come out in court filings that was reported by the Journal de Montreal a couple days ago. And I just think it's sad. It's really tragic. No matter who these guys are, no matter how many people they killed, these are still, multidimensional human beings that have wives and children. I believe Nicky Rizzuto had 2 kids, and the ripple effects can be really extreme and intense, and they can last a lifetime. So on a somber note, Happy New Year. We'll be keeping our finger on the pulse of everything that's going on up in the Great White North. There's a void to be filled for, English-speaking reporters. A lot of great reporting going on by the French Canadian press, but we're really excited to be able to come in here the last couple of years and fill a void for the English-speaking press, and for people that only understand English and don't understand French and want to know the intricacies of the chaos that's been going on in Canada. We're there filling that void. I'm Scott Burnstein. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'm here on a regular basis, uncovering the underworld, one city, one region, one country at a time. Everybody have a Happy New Year. I'll see you on the other end. Scott Burnstein, I'm out.